Welcome to This Organized Life. If you're a mom, wife, or coffee lover seeking advice on how to reduce clutter and reclaim time, look no further than your host, Lori Palau, founder of Simply Be Organized and author of Hot Mess, a practical guide to getting organized. For a lot of people, clutter is their dirty little secret, but it doesn't have to be. Each week, we will share practical tips, chat with experts, and provide strategies on how to keep you organized. I hope that by sharing our stories, you feel a little less alone and more empowered to tackle the areas that are holding you back. So let's get started.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of This Organized Life podcast. I am your host, Lori Palau, and I'm excited for today's episode. We are continuing on our summer series of Clutter and the Enneagram. And if you haven't gone back and listened to our previous episodes with our Enneagrams 1, 2, 3, and 4s, I encourage you to go ahead and do that to learn a little bit more about the inner workings of how each of those types relates to clutter. And I'm very excited for today's guest because, as I said to her right before I hit record, we're going to be talking to a very special Enneagram 5, and 5s to me are an enigma. And I think that there's, from my observations and research, they have a very unique relationship with clutter. And I'd like to really kind of dive in and learn a little bit more from her perspective of kind of how she defines clutter, what her relationship is like. And so this her that I'm talking about is none other than Kellyn Swift. Now, some of you might know Kellyn from the Instagram handle that she facilitates, which is 5ish and Know It, and which is a really popular Instagram handle feed for anybody that's in the Enneagram space. She's also the founder of Unabridged Freedom. She's a writer and she is a mom of 5 kids. She's the oldest of 6, and I'm going to talk to her about that because I'm sure, being the oldest of 6, she probably got a lot of practice with her younger siblings. Her husband is an Army aviator. They live in Washington State. And I reached out to her and I said, I would love to talk to you about your experience with the Enneagram, how you came to know about it, how you use it and apply it in your life, and what your relationship is with clutter and organization and what that looks like for you as an Enneagram 5. So I'm very, very excited for this conversation with my new friend, Kellyn Swift. Welcome, Kellyn, to the show.
Thank you, Lori. It's good.
Thank you. Yes, I'm very, as I've said, I really am not, and I'm not trying to put any added pressure, but I feel like there's so much depth and layers to 5s and finding a 5 that wants to come on the show and talk about it in and of itself is like a big deal.
I can imagine. I think it's served me well that I grew up as the oldest of 6 kids and definitely learned how to be more extroverted than I feel internally. So
yeah. So I gave our listeners or viewers a real top line overview of kind of who you are, but just in your own words, I figured tell them a little bit about you, and then we can kind of dive into Enneagram stuff, but just let them know, like, who is Kellyn? Give us a little bit of backstory.
Yeah. I grew up with a single mom and 6 brothers. Well, sorry, there were 6 of us and I was the oldest. So I did a lot of momming myself in that stage of life, and got married young. I didn't plan on it, but fell head over heels for this guy, and we got married and decided we wanted to have kids right away. And so there's not really been very much of a length of time in my life where I haven't been momming. I feel like I've always been very quiet, very deep, very introspective. I kind of was the resident counselor in all of my friend groups growing up. I was the person that everybody came to for advice and to tell all their secrets. I am a great secret keeper because I like keeping my own, right? So I think that's the thing about 5s.
I think it's interesting. And again, I don't want to digress, but it's interesting because my daughter is a 9 and a lot of people come to her and she's like, Mom, I just met this person, and they just kind of like bared their soul. So I definitely think that there are certain types that are prone to people kind of coming to them. I wonder if that's a withdrawing stance type of a trait, maybe, perhaps.
Very possible. I think both 9s and 5s tend to be fairly private, and I think that there's something about that when we just don't speak often about things, and so sometimes that gives people a little bit more confidence. I think that will be a safe place to hold some space for them and to be a keeper of things that are sensitive and vulnerable. So my husband's a 9 also.
Oh gosh, there you go. Well, and for our listeners, because we've got a diverse audience group. So we've got some people who are Enneagram junkies like myself, and are familiar with it. But we also have a lot of people that listen to our show that don't know a lot about or anything about the Enneagram, or they're real newbies to the whole framework. And if they've been around my work for more than a hot second, they've definitely had some introduction. But for somebody that might be just joining us, can you just give an overview of what the characteristics are of an Enneagram 5 and tell us a little bit about what that person or what that personality type looks like?
Absolutely. So with the Enneagram, the thing that sets it apart from most other personality typing systems is that it's based on the core motivations in the inner world. So nobody else can actually type you. You are the only one who knows what's going on inside. And that was the thing that made me first fall in love with the Enneagram. I did not type as a 5 at the get-go, which I know we'll talk about a little bit later. But what really so when I finally started looking at those very core motivations was when I recognized that this was so central to who I was. So the things that we tend to base Enneagram characteristics off of are the core fears, core desires, core weaknesses, and core longings of the type 5 or of any type on the Enneagram. So for the 5, the core fear tends to look like worries about being incompetent, being invaded, not being comfortable in the world, not knowing how to show up, having obligations placed upon us, and not having enough energy to meet the demands of our world. Those are some of the very central fears that happen for 5 in day-to-day life. The core desire is really to be knowledgeable, capable, and competent. Those are that's the foundation that we like to have in order to feel like we're on stable, secure ground.
I love it. And all I keep thinking of is, oh my gosh, the energy part of it, which as a mom of 5, all I keep thinking of is like, I can't even imagine, but we'll get to that. So keep going.
Yeah. And so the core weakness is avarice. And this one can be a little bit confusing to people, especially I think for 5s, it can feel a little hard for us to hear the fact that we can be other ways that you could say this would be stingy or greedy or things like that I've heard it explained as. And really what it is just this, most often it doesn't show up for 5s in their material possessions. Often 5s can be very generous with a lot of the things that they have, a lot of the material possessions, a lot of their, even some aspects of their time and their energy. But typically what we end up doing is offering a lot of ourselves in one area so that we can kind of hoard the part that we are afraid of, that we might not have enough of if we give out. So whether that's energy or just being concerned that we won't have that we will have a lack of inner resources. So that's kind of the gist of that. And then the core longing for a 5 is really just to know that our needs are not a problem. And that was the thing that drove it home when I was like, I am 1,000% a 5. So when 5s are young, typically we, for whatever reason, doesn't matter the type of parenting you had, you can have had really amazing parents. You can have parents that struggle to know how to create the space for you that you need. But somewhere along the way, we developed this idea that our needs were a problem to the people around us. And so we become very independent and really work hard to not be a burden on the people around us. So that's a little bit of the core of the 5.
It's just, whenever I hear, because again, I think that's what's so fascinating when you start to peel back the layers of the Enneagram and, see the vulnerability of each of the types, when you're like, oh, this is the why, and I know I'm an 8. And so just having like grace for myself versus, again, looking at the why behind things and not judging somebody based on what you see in their behavior. And so I appreciate you kind of walking through this. And I think it explains, well, for me, it explains a lot. And for our listeners out there who might be kind of newer to the Enneagram, hopefully this will maybe give them some indication if they're not sure, if they've taken an assessment or they're trying to figure out who they are, going, well, that's definitely not me, or that might be me. So you brought up an interesting point, which I'd love to get into, which is kind of what your Enneagram journey looked like. And then how did you come to figure out, because like you said, you were mistyped. So just kind of walk us through that whole evolution.
Yeah. So I was introduced to the Enneagram a lot of years ago by my sister-in-law. And at the time that I first took the test, I think I came up with a type 2, and I was like, I don't like this. I don't want this, whatever. And I didn't deal with the Enneagram for another probably 4 years after that. A lot of my history growing up, I had a lot of childhood trauma and a lot of things like that. And so what I learned is that having been the oldest and having a lot of codependent relationships and all these type of things is really what landed me squarely in identifying with a lot of the external characteristics of a type 2. Type 2s are not like that at their core, but when you take a test, it's a little bit hard to get to the root cause, right? So you really have to do what I like to say is trying on a type. You kind of want to try on different types and see what really fits. So a lot of us can have similar behaviors externally, but really that core of who we are is what we want to base it off of, because we need to know what the motivation is behind those characteristics. So another several years later, someone else reintroduced it. My friend was like, you really need to check this out. I think I'm a 7, but just knowing what she knew about me, she's like, I know you'll get into it and you'll help me figure out what I am. And so that should have tipped me off right there.
I was going to say, see, they're already coming to you. Yes. That's so funny.
So I took the test again and did some reading of an overview of the types. And I still really heavily identified with that type 2. And I remember being so offended because my mom and a couple other people were like, oh, you're definitely a type 1. You're not a type 2. There's no way that you're a type 2. And I was like, how rude. This is not okay.
Well, and for those of you who are new, the 2 is the helper. And again, I always say, who doesn't want to be a helper, right? I don't know anybody that's like, I wouldn't want to be a helper. And, but again, that's so funny. So if people are like, that's not you.
Right. And it was my close people. Now, a lot of the people in my outer circles were like, oh yeah, I could definitely see you as a 2. This makes sense. Whatever. Anyway, so I actually mistyped as a 2 for 2 years, all the way through my Enneagram coaching certification.
No way.
And really what it came down to for me was therapy. I was in therapy, and one day after a really intensive therapy session, I'm standing in the shower, and all of a sudden I was like, oh no. I think I thought other thoughts than that, but I was like, oh no. Oh no. What if I mistyped myself? And the instant thought that I had was, how mortifying, how embarrassing to have come this far, to have coached people, to have taught on the Enneagram, to have researched as much as I've researched. And when I recognized my pattern of thinking, it was all related to competency. And I'm standing there in the shower and I'm like, when I get out, I'm going to grab Beatrice Chestnut's book, The Complete Enneagram. And I knew exactly where to go. I opened up to a sexual type 5, and I read it and highlighted almost the entire thing and bawled my eyes out. And wow. So it was just so like, I knew that if I'm not a 2, I know exactly what will resonate with me. And so that was a couple of years ago now. And it's been so crazy. There's a couple things that I really have loved looking back though. Even with the mistyping journey, I always tell people, don't be afraid to mistype, because there is something so powerful in that I needed to explore that part of myself. And I don't think I would be at the place that I'm at today if I wouldn't have thought back then, oh man, I'm a really dysfunctional 2. I don't like doing any of these things that people say that I should care about. And I don't have loads of excess energy, and I don't have, but I let myself learn to just be okay with that. And even in that, like, if I just look different than other type 2s, that's fine. And looking back at my journals over that couple years of mistyping, I was just it was so encouraging to see how none of it was wasted. And I could actually see those 5-ish themes coming out in my journaling and in the things that I had learned, and became such a healthier, just a healthier version of myself through that process. So I always tell people, don't be afraid to try on types. And if you mistype, it's not a big deal. That's what this is for. So
exactly. I love that. And there's a couple things I want to just kind of circle back to.
Yeah.
One of the things is, well, you mentioned, just for anybody that picked up on it, you said you're a sexual 5. So there are subtypes, which we're not going too deep down the rabbit hole on this episode, but just for anybody that picked up on it, because one of the added richness pieces of the Enneagram is there all of these layers. So each type has what are called subtypes. You want to just very kind of top line, just speak into that, Kellyn, and just tell people, because I think that's going to also help people that might be, struggling with trying to identify on which type they are.
Yes, I would absolutely say when I'm coaching people, that's one of the earliest things that I go through is subtypes, because it's actually something that you can see from the external and the way that you operate in your life. It's pretty easy to identify, and it can make a huge difference in what that number looks like. So if you, there's what they call a counter type of every type. I am that for the type 5. And so there are a lot of ways that I don't look like a traditional 5, such as being willing to have conversations like this, or just being a little bit more, appearing more extroverted, even though I'm a true introvert at heart, but appearing more extroverted. So there's 3 different main instincts or subtypes. You'll hear it by both names. But the first one is self-preservation. And as you can imagine, that is pretty self-explanatory there.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about looking at the world around you and figuring out, do I have what I need? The best example that I've heard comes from, I believe it's the Wisdom of the Enneagram book. And he talks about walking into a room. And so for the self-preservation, they're going to walk into a room and they're going to say, what's the temperature? Am I going to have food that I like here? Is it a safe place? Like, just trying to get oriented and making sure that they're comfortable. So that will translate a lot over into their life. Then there's a social subtype. And so a social would walk into a room and say, who are the most important people here? Who do I need to network with? Who do I need to know? And and then the sexual is really not focused on who are the most important people. It's more about who's most interesting to me. Who do I feel like just magnetically drawn to? And so that's kind of the just a brief overview of the differences between the 3. But I actually was thinking about this, and I think that really makes a difference in how you approach clutter as well. So I think that's an interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other point that I want to make, so thank you for doing that, for kind of walking us through that. And then the other point is there's a little bit of each type in all of us. And that's one of the beauties. And if you look at the Enneagram diagram and you look at the visual of it, you see all of the intersecting arrows, and everybody has a dominant type. But we have connection points, whether it's through our wings, the numbers on either side of us, our stress and security, all of the different, our triads, our stances, all of the, and again, for newbies, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole and overwhelm them. I like to geek out on all of this stuff because I've consumed all this knowledge. But in the framework that I look at, it's not exclusively kind of how you deal with clutter, based exclusively on your core type and the characteristics, but how are you in different situations? What type do you gravitate to in periods of stress? Because a lot of times clutter is stress. It is stress inducing. It is a result of stress. So there are a lot of times you might be picking up a characteristic of one of your supporting types, we'll call them, that are not your core type. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I actually wrote some notes about that.
Oh, good. Go and talk about them.
Yeah, mostly in that. So for a 5, there's different ways to view those resource lines that you're talking about. I think my favorite language for it that I found so far is that lines of integration and disintegration. So because we have the kind of this idea that we've heard that one is supposed to be healthier and one is supposed to be less healthy, but it really is in different situations that you encounter that. So for the type 5, our 8 resource point is at my strongest and my healthiest growth. I have all the best qualities of an 8. I can be really assertive. I can take charge when I need to. I can be confident in sharing what I have to offer with the world. And then on the low side of 8 for me is around my closest people. I will disintegrate into some of those maybe lower 8-ish behaviors that when I'm struggling, that looks more like being a little bit more aggressive, being a little bit more short-tempered and withdrawing, because 8s have that 5 line also. So
and I see it in myself.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, so what would be called the line of disintegration is the type 7. And so for us, for 5s, when we go to that low side of 7 in stress, it's going to look very scattered. We will tend to feel very overwhelmed. And yeah, so there's a lot of those aspects, the lower side of 7 there, that I think really play into this, and that I notice in my life is when I'm in that place of stress, whether it begins with the clutter in my life or it just ends up causing more issues for me with the clutter. So I will get more stressed and more scattered and feel like I need to control something when I'm in that space. And then the high side of 7 is obviously just the ability for type 5s to be more free and just let go and enjoy and have fun. And so if I guess
and again, that's one of the many things, because there are different types of clutter, as you know, you and I have spoken. And for anybody that's new to our show, you know, I talk about clutter in kind of 3 buckets, if you will. And then there's like the Enneagram, there's all these subsets that we can dive into. But if you want to talk kind of broad stroke picture, we talk about the physical clutter, which is the stuff that you see: laundry, dishes, clothes, mail, all that stuff. Then you have the emotional clutter, and that is the guilt, fear that holds us back from taking action. And the emotional clutter will then result in physical clutter. And then we have what I call calendar clutter, which is being overscheduled or not using your time wisely. And all of that, again, can tie back in. So when I'm speaking and I do a model of that, there are like 3 concentric circles, because they are all related. You know, it's not a linear or siloed, you know, it's either A, B, or C. It's a little bit of each one, but most people are dominant with one. Like most people struggle with one, and then it like trickles into the other areas. And so I'm curious to know, of those very broad stroke definitions, what have you felt in your experience? Where do you feel like you might relate to with your 5-ness as showing up?
Yeah. I was thinking about this a lot last night. You had kind of given me that little bit of overview. I think that my physical space has always been pretty collected. I've done a pretty good job of keeping that organized. And I think a lot of that had to do with that search for control. I needed something that I could control in my life, and that worked. And so especially because I feel like my emotional and mental life gets very cluttered and overwhelming feeling and chaotic, I tend to control a lot more heavily my physical space. So yeah, I would definitely say that I have leaned more toward that emotion, which makes a lot of sense looking at being in the head triad and having your thoughts going crazy all the time. I also have ADHD, so that factors in a little bit for me there as well. But the emotional clutter really resonated a lot with me. I think they're definitely, when I get into that stress space, I can slide into some calendar clutter that you're talking about there. I tend to, that's another aspect of this. And that in that lower 7-ish space for me, I tend to overbook. I tend to make myself way too busy, say yes to too many things. Again, scattered, unprepared, chaotic, and just overscheduled in general. So but I think that the emotional clutter comes first for me, and then typically I slide into that calendar clutter, if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense. And again, like anything, there's no right or wrong answer, and not every 5. So if you're out there listening, you're like, I'm a 5. That means I'm going to struggle with this, or I'm a 5, or maybe I'm not a 5 because I struggle with this. And this isn't, and I say this to people all the time. It's all about just having a tool in your toolbox of knowing if this is who you are and how you process information and how you see the world. What are the strategies that are going to help me be the best version of myself? And knowing that a 5 has certain characteristics. If you struggle with emotional clutter, I might use a different strategy than I would for a 9 that struggles with emotional clutter, because it's not going to give you that light bulb aha moment. And so we want people to have the buy-in for sustainable, like a sustainable system for you. And we don't want people to white knuckle it. I think so many times we white knuckle our way through life, and clutter and organization it's a long game. Like organization's a long game, and it looks differently, whether you're a mom, whether you're a single person, you're in your 20s, 40s, or 60s, you still have different things that are going to take priority. And how are you going to be able to navigate that? So we're going to take a quick break, and then we come back. I want to talk a little bit about kind of the organization, like where you really feel like you're strong. Like what are some of those things, and where do you struggle? Because I have some specific 5 questions for people that are in my life that are 5s and where I've seen them struggle. So sit tight. Okay, Kellyn. So you said that you're organized, and like you are organized in your physical space. You're a mom of 5 kids. I'm looking at you right now. You are very put together. So obviously there's a level of organization, and you helped raise your 5 siblings, your 5 younger siblings. So obviously there are some organizing strengths that you have, whether it's been through practice or just through intuition, have mastered. Tell me where you feel like what are some of those areas that you really feel like intuitively, like I've got this?
Yeah. I feel like there's been a major shift for me in that, and I actually am really grateful for it. When I was younger, I was very, very good at organizing everything from our household. I ran our household because my mom was a working mom, and so I helped with bills. I helped with just a whole bunch of those things. I helped homeschool my younger siblings and educated myself at home. And so there were a lot of moving parts that I had to keep track of. And I became very rigid in my schedules in having to write everything down. And then I got married, and my husband was in school full time, and we didn't have a steady income, and I couldn't plan. And all of a sudden I was thrown into this just need to really learn to just roll with things and be flexible. And so I spent a lot of years really not making lists and just kind of floundering in that for a long time. And so I feel like I've come back now, especially, through this Enneagram journey and my faith journey over the last couple of years, and going to therapy, coming back to a place where it's a lot more balanced for me. I can start to pull in some of those strengths that I used to have a lot about, making schedules and organizing things, and have it be more of like, I like to say rhythms now. There's a rhythm to our day. We have kind of centering things that we pull back in that help us a lot and really help me, I think, as a type 5. It can be very, like you said, very overwhelming. I have 5 kids at home. I homeschool. So they're
How old are your kids? What's the age ranges?
So my youngest is 5 and my oldest is just turned 14. And we actually just finished our home study, adoptive home study. So we're hoping to adopt here shortly.
Why not? Why not? God bless.
This has been our hope for a very long time. So
I love it.
Cause for celebration for us.
No, absolutely.
I'm excited.
That's great.
Yeah, go ahead. What's your question?
No. I was just going to say, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wrote down, I love the fact of the rhythms, because I feel like for so many types, not just 5s, so many types, we can go to the other extreme of that rigidity. the rigidity of your schedule, the rigidity of it has to be done this way. We have to do this in this order, almost to this like OCD perspective, whether it's, this is what we do, this is the order that we do it. And that actually becomes more restrictive for us, as opposed to using this as a guideline, as a template to say, okay, this is how we're going to stay on track. Here's our roadmap. It becomes more of a, ball and chain type of thing. So I love the fact that you're like, we're using this for rhythm. So
Yeah.
I think that's, I just think that's gold right there.
It's really the rhythms of the question that I ask to help myself establish those rhythms is really what is going to help make my life and my home work for us, work for me, instead of what I used to do was try to make myself fit into a schedule, try to make myself fit into my home. And so now I've learned just practical things like I have a basket at the bottom of the stairs and a basket at the top of the stairs, because I used to get so stressed about stuff sitting on the stairs or feeling like I needed to go put stuff away right that second. And now everything goes in the basket. And at the end of the day, I'm like, hey, take the basket upstairs with you and clean it out. And so just simple things like that, that was like, if we're already having this issue with all of our stuff accumulating down here, why not just throw a basket there that looks cute? And so I think that that's a huge part of establishing those rhythms for me. Everything that we do, my kids, one of my favorite activities with my kids and something that they all enjoy, which, as you can imagine, when you have 5 kids, is very hard to find something that everyone loves. But we read books and we do a tea time in the afternoon. And that is so calming and just resetting for me, because I have some reserved kids like me, but then I have a couple of kids that are just endless energy, serious extroverts. And so it's just a really centering time for all of us to come back together, and kind of anchors our day a little bit. So things like that with the rhythms I've found to be super important for myself. And I've definitely heard that from other type 5s as well. When they have that point where they can come back and recenter, it helps a lot. So
I love it. And in terms of, so I have another question to follow up on this. One of the things I want you to tell me if this is true for you, because as you mentioned earlier in the episode, that the heads are that the 5s are in the head triad. So again, for anybody that's familiar with the Enneagram or has looked at my work as well, we know that there's 3 centers: the head, heart, gut, different triads, different stances. And our 5s, 6s, and 7s are in what's known as the head triad. So the center that you lead with is the headspace. So you think more analytically, more practically, less emotionally, is not your initial default. So in your experience personally, have you found that you get hung up in the planning phase of certain projects, and as opposed to getting actually to the execution stage? Because I feel like for some specific 5s that are in my life, I've seen that as a thread and a through line. And I'm just wondering if that's something that you've seen in your own life.
yes, yeah, it's absolutely true. 5s are also doing repressed. Again, that's kind of a drive down the Enneagram, but I think that factors in as well. And yeah, the combination of being that head type, where that's what I lead with. That's what I lead with, is all the planning, all of the research, and often never getting around to talk to us. I have so many things sitting in my Amazon cart that I've been researching for years that have been sitting there, and I never got around to actually purchasing them, which is great on a money side of things, a financial aspect.
Yes.
But yes, it does. There's so many dreams I've had, so many things I've wanted to do that have really just never gotten out of the planning stage. So I think that's definitely very true for me and for a lot of 5s from what I have heard. It's a very common struggle. I think when we talk about stuff like that in our 5-ish group, it's usually around at least 90%, 95% of the people in there that really resonate with struggling to actually do something with the planning, with the dreaming, with the putting things together and the organizing. So yeah, the taking action part is very much a struggle.
Yeah. And you again hit on a very important point, which is, again, when I go deeper into my framework and I look at kind of that role of your what's known as the repressed center or your least access center, and our 4s, 5s, and 9s are doing repressed. So again, the struggle in that you have to be more intentional to kind of actually pull the trigger, so to speak, to make that happen. And, I guess for me as a professional organizer, I talk to other colleagues who maybe don't have kind of the Enneagram perspective and get, almost at a crossroads of how do you work with a client that is somebody who may struggle. They might be a 5 or have those type of tendencies where they really do need that, I gave them homework and they didn't do it. And again, that could go through for any type, right? We could do it for anybody. A 7 could be like, there's something more fun to do. A 2 could be like, I needed to go drop a meal off at somebody's house. There's like 1,000 reasons why we can all procrastinate and do all the things. But specifically for people, we're talking about the 5s who might say, well, I spent time researching this, doing all of this, but never actually pulling the trigger to do this. Or I moved things from pile A to pile B. I've seen that a lot with people where I spent an hour doing it and they did, but they literally just moved things from over here to over there. What would be your advice to somebody to help them that might be listening? How do you get them to kind of cross the finish line?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that my therapist helped me with that was really changed the way that I am able to move forward in things is he talked about it like he said, imagine you're juggling. And so you're juggling some plates and you've got these crystal plates and you've got maybe some wooden plates and you've got some rubber plates, right? So you're juggling and you know that if you drop that crystal, it's going to shatter and it's going to be gone and it's not going to come back from there. If you drop the wood, it might dent, it might crack a little, but you can drop it a couple of times and it's probably going to be okay. If you drop something rubber, it's just going to bounce back. And so he has really encouraged me to start putting things into that framework. And that a lot with not feeling so overwhelmed. I think as a 5, I can get really overwhelmed because I like to put an exhaustive list down of all the things that I need to do. And then I can look at that and go, oh, this is so overwhelming. I don't even know where to start. So if I can put that whole list down, it still makes me feel better. But then if I just have 1 or 2 items up in that crystal section up there and work on those, and when those are done, either there's a new crystal thing or we'll move something from wood up to crystal. And so that system has really worked a lot for me, just prioritizing so that the overwhelm doesn't get there. I think a small focus is really important, and probably not just for 5s, but I know that it is important for 5s.
No, absolutely. I think that is so, I love that. And I'm absolutely going to use that. I'll credit you for all of this, and your therapist. But I think I think it's great because I think it's really important. Now, the one other area, since we were kind of talking about that withdrawing stances and talking about that, is I'm just curious from the orientation to time perspective, which is another layer in the Enneagram world, where we talk about there's 3 different orientations to time: past, present, and future. And me as an Enneagram 8, I am forward thinking. I always tell people I don't even like to look in the rear view mirror when I'm driving. Like I am so 5 steps ahead of what's happening.
Yeah.
But our 5s, their orientation to the time, or your orientation to time, I should say, is the past. And I'm wondering how that shows up for you when it comes to the world of like clutter and organization. Because I have a 4 daughter and a 9 daughter. So I have 2 girls that are in the withdrawing stance, and my husband's a 3 and I'm an 8. So there's a lot here. And I'm wondering for you what that looks like.
Yeah. So I think for me, it doesn't show up too much in the sentimental aspect of it. I know for a lot of people who look at the past, like I have a daughter, which my kids are too young to type, but she has some very 9-ish vibes to her at this point. And she is everything special. Everything is special. And it's so hard to let go of things. I don't struggle with that. But what I have noticed about me is that I take information from the past and maybe the times when I didn't have something that I needed. And so that will make it difficult for me to let go of things and to release things, because I'm always thinking about what if I need this later.
Well, I and that's so like, I'm so glad when you say these things, because it just like reinforces that I'm like, okay, I might be on the right track. And I say that emotional piece could be guilt, it can be fear, it can be sentiment. And for certain types, that emotional piece, or like you said, in this case, the past orientation of time isn't about the sentiment, but it could be about fear. It could be like, I knew I didn't have this, so I need to hold this. I remember this time that we needed this, so I am going to save this. And I've seen that a lot with other fives. So it's reassuring, I guess, to know that that's a through line.
Totally. I think it can apply to a lot of different areas too, depending on your five-ish experience growing up. So for me, having grown up well below the poverty line with a single mom, I was working to contribute to the family. We were on a lot of, state help at the same time, just doing our best. And so for me, I've noticed that I've had to release a lot of that with just everything in my life, and it has caused a lot of buildup and a lot of clutter. So it becomes a very physical thing for me. Well, I'm gonna hold on to this because I don't know when I can actually get it again. Even though like my brain is still stuck in that, even though we're not in that place in our life anymore. And I have faith that if I need something, it will come back around to me. I don't need to hoard and to hold on. So
that scarcity mindset is a very hard thing to, because again, from a logical, analytical perspective, you could sit there and say, I'm looking at the math. We've got money in the bank.
Right.
We have this, things are accessible, but we pull from our past experiences, and somebody whose orientation of time is the past. I feel like those memories are more vivid than they are for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where I'm just like, we'll figure it out. Before we go, and again, I've a host of questions I didn't even get to, but I want to be respectful of your time, especially as a five. Before we take our last break, in addition to the many pearls of wisdom that you shared with us throughout this episode, in closing, I just love for you to share with anybody who might identify as a five, think they're a five, or like live in love with somebody who is an Enneagram 5. What is some advice that you could share to help them if they might be struggling when it comes to organization and clutter?
I think that one of the biggest things, I've had so many conversations with people, and not just fives, but with people who love fives on our five-ish account. A lot of people follow for that reason, like, help me get some insight here. And I've had some really great conversations recently about just the outside perspective of a type 5. And so often, like, there's so much going on inside, mentally, obviously, but also emotionally, that does not show up on the outside. And I think it's super critical for the people around us to know that, and to take the time to help us dig into that a little bit. Because often we won't even recognize what else is going on inside. And so I think if you're just looking at it from a logical standpoint, a lot of us as fives can go, well, we already have made the most logical decisions, and we have this all put together, but can't really identify sometimes some of those more emotional things that may be holding us back, whether it's fear or something else. And so I think that just remembering that people have, that fives specifically, since that's what we're talking about today, but that fives have such a deep well of like emotion and love and care about stuff. And as just a short example, one of the things that came out in therapy for me that was pertaining specifically to clutter, I was so controlling over my home space, and I would get so angry at the people in my home when I would clean something and then they would mess it up. And I had to learn that for me, I was tying in this, basically, if you love someone, you will take care of that space, because I did not experience that in one of the homes that I grew up in, which was, I would show up every other weekend and there would be moldy stuff sitting around, and I would have to put a clean sheet on the bed and stick my brothers and sisters on it and clean the house from top to bottom. And it was every time we went back, it was that way. And so for me, that created this like idea that that a mess equals not being loved well, And so there that was the flip side you're talking about, right? I'm hyper organizing than my physical space, but it was that rigid aspect of it. So for me, it was so helpful to help me release some of those things, because here's the thing: when you're so hyper controlled about your physical space that you can't let anything get out of order, it really just moves all, I feel like, for me anyway, has moved all into that emotional realm. So all of my chaos shifts to there, because I don't have time to deal with anything internal, because I'm so focused on keeping everything out here. So I think just recognizing for fives that there is that balance. Yes, you've got a lot of probably great organizational abilities and the ability to logic through stuff, but I think just recognizing, for us to recognize, and for the people that love us to recognize, that really the emotional aspect of things probably plays a factor into it more than any of us realize. And so it's worth digging into.
I love that. That is amazing. That's so great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That honesty and vulnerability is just so well received. And I know that that's going to really resonate with a lot of people. Before we take our last break, where's the best place for people to learn more about you, connect up with you, follow you, all the things?
Yeah. So obviously you can find me at my name, at Kellyn Swift, on Instagram, and then at Five-ish and I Know It on Instagram as well. And obviously Five-ish, we talk pretty solely about type 5 stuff. And then I do a lot of my writing and talking about more just holistic aspect. My coaching style is definitely a holistic Enneagram. I don't believe that the Enneagram is the end all be all for helping people move forward in their life, but I think it's an amazing tool to be added, kind of like what you're doing here.
Agreed. I was going to say agreed, 100%.
Yeah. So Instagram is probably the best place to find me. I have a website, unabridged freedom or unabridgedfreedom.com. And yeah, I think that's.
I'm going to link up to all those things, and everything will be in our show notes. So not to worry if you're out and about listening, walking the dog, in the car, whatever, we will make sure that you can connect up with Kellyn and all things Five-ish if you would like. So we are going to take our last break, come back, and just do our final wrap-up questions. So sit tight. All right, Kellyn, this has been so great. Again, I could sit and talk to you for hours, asking questions and probing all about your Enneagram wisdom with your own experiences and everything. But we will have to table that for another time. So for now, I'd love to just pick your brain with 3 final questions. So one of the questions that we ask all of our guests is, if there's a book that has been really transformative, either it's a book that you go back to time and time again, or maybe it's a book that you refer to friends, or maybe some of your coaching clients, something that you would love the rest of this organized life community to know about, what would that book be?
Oh, that's a hard question. I wrote down a couple because I thought you might ask me that. And so I'm going to give you just a couple here.
Go ahead. That's okay. I don't want you to have Sophie's choice. You can name more than one. It's fine.
Okay. So The Body Keeps Score has been really instrumental for me and just the things that I've experienced in my life. It is very heavy reading, and I'm a really fast reader, but it has taken me literally years to get through this book because it's such a slow processing thing. So that's phenomenal. I would encourage anyone, especially anybody who, well, probably anyone. I don't think there's anybody that gets away from life with without at least some little T trauma in their life, right? So I think that it's really a wonderful book. A recent book that I loved, I read in the last couple of years, was Try Softer. And she's incredible. You can find her. I should have paid attention. Just a second.
Yeah, no worries.
Actually, so her name is Andi Kolber, and I'm pretty sure that's how you say it. I'm not sure exactly how, so I don't know if
we'll link to it, so it'll be fine. We'll make sure that we link to it, so even if we mispronounced it.
Perfect. And then as far as Enneagram books go, if people are curious about that, my absolute favorite is The Complete Enneagram by Beatrice Chestnut. And that's very deep dive. It's more of a resource book, but if you are having to try to decide, between some types, and especially like want to look at those subtypes and see, because the subtype, like for example, when I look at a self-preservation 5, I think I highlighted 2 sentences in the entire thing. It did not resonate with me at all. So it makes a huge difference. And then Take Care of Your Type by Christina Wilcox is.
Oh, I don't know that one.
I have loved so much. She just has such a compassionate voice. Everything online is that way. She talks a lot about mental health and stuff now as well, but such a compassionate voice. And I absolutely love that book for
great
ways to help take care of yourself and for others to take care of you and your type.
Well, you've given us plenty of reading to do in very 5 fashions. So thank you. And then our last 2 questions, which we ask all of our guests, and it can be answered like very lighthearted. It can be super serious, whatever you like. In this particular season of your life, where do you feel like you are the most organized, and where do you feel like a little bit of a hot mess?
So I would say my home is pretty organized at this point in my life, and I think digitally. I don't know if that counts.
Does. Oh, that counts big time. Absolutely. Yes.
And it's very stressful for me, even just knowing that it exists on all my hard drives and on so I have, thousands of emails that I need to sort through and pictures that need to be sorted. And
yes. So digital is its own beast. So again, yes, we do quite a bit of talk on digital. So yes, it absolutely counts. Well, Kellyn, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure to sit down and chat with you. Thank you for allowing me to come pick your brain and try to get inside and learn a little bit more, to have some more grace and empathy for our Enneagram 5s. And again, I encourage anybody that's curious about learning about the Enneagram to check out some of these resources. Make sure that you go back and listen to our past episodes and subscribe so you can get the rest of our episodes, because using this framework to kind of connect the dots on how we deal with clutter and organization has been really transformative for me, and how not only do I deal with it in my own life and personally, but how I work with my clients. And I think just having those extra tools in your toolbox can be really helpful for you. And I know I tell people this all the time. If I had known the Enneagram when my kids were younger, I think I would have been a healthier parent. I would have yelled a lot less. There are certain phrases I would have, that are cringeworthy now that I would not have used. And so I really feel like there's so much value to be had from using, again, this tool to, help be the best version of yourself. So until next week, I'm Lori Palau. Peace out. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this episode, please spread the love and share it with your friends. And if this is your first time joining us, make sure to click the subscribe button wherever you are listening so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, please leave us a review so other people know that our show is worth the listen. You can also find us on YouTube and Instagram at This Organized Life Podcast. And if you'd like to connect with us, you can head on over to our website at simply the letter B like boy organized.com, which is filled with tons of resources, including free downloads, checklists, links to our amazing organizing partners, and all of our digital offerings. I'll see you next week for another episode of This Organized Life.